Morning, year 5. Whoa! It's more maths. Excellent. Right. We are now going to move on. We've done some prime numbers and hopefully you've aced it. Now we're going to move on and we're going to look at square numbers. Okay. So square numbers, square roots. Now you'll see on this PowerPoint, this little presentation, that there is some red writing. If you see the red writing, those things are going to be a little extension tasks. So if you already know loads about square numbers and square roots, you have to do everything else. But I want you to aim to try and do some of the stuff that's in red as well as we go through. Don't worry if you can't do it, just focus on the other tasks. So square numbers, well, square numbers are called squares because if you were to draw that number of squares like this, you would make a square. So for example, this is 9, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9. There are 9 squares in here, which means that 9 is what we call a square number. Now, if you look at the dimensions on the side, this is 3 by 3. Okay, so we can write this as 3 by 3 makes 9. 3 times 3 makes 9, which means that 9 is a square number. So have a think about why that would be a square number. But there are other numbers that we can't. So whatever we do, if we try and rearrange 10 small squares like this, we cannot make a square. Okay, so 10 cannot be a square number because we cannot make a square out of that many of these shapes. Try and think of it that way. Now there's a little bit that we need to talk about, and that is about perfect squares and non-perfect squares. A perfect square is one where the numbers on the sides of this square are whole numbers. A non-perfect square, or just a square number that's kind of a bit more rare, let's say, is that something like 1.5 times 1.5. That's very confusing. So don't worry about that. Just think of all of these as square numbers, but perfect squares are the ones we're going to be looking at today. Okay, so if you multiply a number by itself, you get a square number. So for what I'd like to do on your whiteboard, teachers get ready to pause. On your whiteboard, I would just like you to write down for me the first 3 square numbers, Go. Okay, so hopefully the numbers that you wrote down, 1 times 1 is 1. Hopefully you all got that one. 2 times 2 is 4. 3 times 3 is 9. And then 4 times 4 is 16. So all of those numbers, all of these ones, hold on, let me not highlight it in a red. Right, all of those ones there, those are the square numbers. They're the square numbers. Now, if we go down, let's have a look at the next bit. Here we go. So we've got 1 times 1. Well, that's 1. 2 times 2 gives you 4 squares. Hopefully this is making sense. So we're outlining our square numbers. 3 times 3 is 9. 4 times 4 is 16. So 9 and 16 are both square numbers. 5 times 5 is 25. So 25 is a square number. And 6 times 6 is 36. So 36 is a square number. Okay, can you just quickly outline what is the next square number after 36? And the clue is on the screen. What's the next number after 36 and the one after that as well? Pause the screen and write it on your whiteboard, please. Okay, so the answer you should have had, 7 times 7 is 49. And here, I'm not going to do it because we'll be here for a very long time. You'll be very bored. But there are 49 squares here. And if we were to go on the sides, it would be 7, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7 by 7, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7. And 7 times 7 is 49. The next square number after 49 is 64 because 8 times 8 is 64. I ate and I ate and I was sick on the floor. And that is 8 by 8 to make this square. Okay. Now, we also have 9 times 9, which I'm sure you know is 81. Right, so those are our square numbers. Now, the other thing that we need to find is a square root. So I'm just going to write down, if we have 8 times 8 equals 64, then this is the square number. 64 is our square number, but we can do this as well. We write this symbol. This is called a radical. It's a really cool symbol. Radical. Sometimes on a computer, it forgets the top bit, and that's because computers aren't as clever as you guys. So the square root of 64 is 8. And what that means is that if I take 8, I times it by itself, I will make 64. So by finding the square root, you're just finding what number is it that I can times by itself to make the question that you're trying to find the square root of. So what is, for example, the square root of, let's see, what's the square root of 36? What's the square root of 36? And that means what is the number that if you would times it by itself makes 36? Have a go at that one, and I'll just write a little extension on here as well. Let's also do the square root of 121. Okay, do both those on your board, please. Okay, so now what I want you to do is, so the square root of 36 is 6, and the square root of 121 is 11, and that's because 6 times 6 makes 36, and 11 times 11 is 121. Now that's square numbers. So square numbers, that little 2 there, so this 8 squared, that 2 means there are 2 lots of 8 multiplied by themselves, you see, so 8 times 8. Sometimes you'll also see, let's clear the decks a little bit here. Sometimes you'll also see something else. You'll see something that looks like this. Now that means 8 cubed. So instead of just doing 8 times 8, you do 8 times 8 times 8. And you can see, look, 1, 2, there are 3 8s being multiplied together. So 8 times 8 times 8 is the same as 8 cubed. Okay, so a few questions you're going to come across, you're going to see that as well. And you can see, if you think about it like this, 8 squared, well, that makes a square. 8 cubed is because we're doing 8 times 8 times 8. We have 3 numbers multiplied to make a cube. Okay, so what I want you to do now, when we say this phrase, it says evaluate each of these, 3 squared, 5 squared, and 1 squared. All that means is find the answer to. Evaluate. So you're going to do 3 squared and 5 squared and 1 squared. And if you've done that and you're feeling like you really want to push yourself, I want you to try to do 3 cubed, 5 cubed, and 1 cubed. Okay, pause the video and off you go. Okay, so 3 squared, that's 3 times 3 is 9. 5 squared, which is 5 times 5 is 25. And 1 squared, 1 times 1 makes 1. 3 cubed is 3 times 3 times 3. Well, that is 3 times 3 is 9, times another 3 is 27. 5 cubed is 5 times 5 times 5. 5 times 5 is 25, times that by 5 again, and you get 125. And this is the hardest one. 1 times 1 times 1. Well, 1 times 1 is 1, and if I times that by 1 again, I get 1. So the first cube number is 1, and also the first squared number is also 1. Interesting, isn't it? Okay, now on the next bit, how about this? Now you're going to evaluate these square roots, and what you have to do then is find out the answer to what is the square root of 36, which number times by itself makes 36, which number times by itself makes 100, and which number times by itself makes 49. And then there's a much harder challenge if you finish those 3, and that is which number multiplied by itself 3 times makes 64 and 27 and 125. Okay, pause the video and off you go, guys. Okay, so the square root of 36, well, 6 times 6 makes 36, so the square root is 6. Square root of 100, well, 10 times 10 makes 100, so that means the square root is 10. And 49, square root of 49 is 7, because 7 times 7 makes 49. Over here on the harder stuff, we've got 64, this cube root of 64, that's which number multiplied by itself 3 times makes 64, not which number multiplied by 3, don't get confused by that bit. And 4 times 4 times 4 makes 64. For the next one, what number is multiplied by itself 3 times to make 27, that is 3. And the final one, 125, the cube root of that is 5, because 5 times 5 times 5 makes 125. Okay, so what I'd like you to do, you've got times table squares somewhere on your table or maybe at the front. And what I want you to do is, using that times table square, I just want you to highlight all of the square numbers you can find. Do that in one color. If you finish that, you should notice a pattern. If you finish that, you can also highlight all of the cube numbers, make that a different color. Just think before you do it, because remember, if something is a cube and a square number, you'll need to do it in 2 different colors. You'll need to do half and half. So plan it before you do it, highlight all the numbers on the type table squares which are square numbers and all of those that are cube numbers. Once you've done that, you can get on with your task. See you later, guys.